Hello, everybody. Ted Huntington here with another fabulous podcast interview. This one featuring Mari Collier, a fabulous writer right now who resides in California. Mari was born on a farm in Iowa, and she's lived in several states, including Arizona, Washington, and Southern California. She is the Ascensions, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, curator for the 29 Palms Historical Society. She's worked as a collector, bookkeeper, receptionist, and as an advanced super agent for Nintendo of America. More impressive than that, Mari Collier is a highly accomplished author. She has penned the popular Twisted Tales series, Twisted Tales from the Desert, Twisted Tales from the Northwest, Twisted Tales from the Universe, and Twisted Tales from a Skewed Mind. In addition, Mari has authored 6 books, the Chronicle of Maka series, and 3 books in her Tonath Chronicles collections. I hope I'm pronouncing these right. Please correct me if I'm not. And if my math serves me, that's about 13 books in all. That's quite a collection. And all of Mari's titles are on Amazon. I'm going to post links to Mari's books below underneath the video, as well as a link to Women's Rights website, that's the sponsor for this interview series. We encourage you to subscribe to our Patreon page to help support these interviews and women's rights. And without any further ado, please welcome my special guest, Mari Collier.
Hello, Ted. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for joining me. You are clearly the queen of the book series. My first question to you is, did you start out with the goal of writing these collections, or how did they evolve?
Well, I started out when I was 11 or 12 years old, writing about this troubled teenager. And first chapter, I managed to kill off every character except 2. When I showed it to my brother, who was a major at the University of Iowa in English, of all things, and a certified near genius, because they were doing those kind of IQ tests back then, he took one look at it, doubled over in laughter, and said, "You can't do that." At which point I was so heartbroken, I just sort of put it away. But I kept writing about this troubled teenager and discovered that to get him on the right path, his own bookish uncle was no help. So, of course, I had this in a Western, by the way. So I invented a stepfather. Well, he couldn't have a stepfather if the father wasn't married to the mother. So I resurrected Anna.
Makes sense.
In fact, I don't resurrected Anna. I resurrected his brother Daniel and a couple of other people while I was at it. So, any rate, and I kept writing at it, and I discovered that I like to write, but I really didn't stay with it. Then, when I was 17, I discovered science fiction. So I made and I discovered Zena Henderson, that a woman could write science fiction. So I then made a little one, the stepfather, who had taken the name of Zebediah MacDonald on Earth, an alien, and not just one kind of alien. He was a Justine Thalian mixture, which was verboten in his universe, and so they had stranded him on Earth. And it sort of goes on from there. And then I uh, did sell a short story to Jack and Jill's Children uh, magazine way back when, as I was making up stories for my children, for bedtime, like my father had done. And then the next thing I know, my husband moves us from Arizona, which I did not like at all because we went to the Pacific Northwest. Horrific rain, 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 and more rain. It was really kind of depressing, truthfully. And we had to then take in his mother, so we had a place for her on our acre property, and so I was rather busy, and then I went to work, and I because our insurance was so high as we aged, and the next thing I know, I'm working for a place called Nintendo. I had absolutely no idea what it meant when Kelly Girls sent me there. So Nintendo I eventually agreed to go with them. I didn't at first because I knew I'd be working long hours, and sure enough, Nintendo in the late 1980s, early 1900s, if you worked there, you worked ungodly hours. So,
Yeah, they
uh,
were growing quite fast back then.
oh, Bill, it was amazing, yes. So I wound up in the correspondence department, and they were paying me to read, to write, and to play games because we had to know the games too. And I eventually also became a gameplay counselor, which is how I got this ridiculous title of advanced software agent.
Well, that's interesting. So how did it would seem to me that if you're a science fiction writer and you're playing Nintendo games, there has to be some sort of connection there in some way in which playing Nintendo games would help with your science fiction writing and your creativity there.
Not well, man, help. What it did help me because it was in correspondence. I learned to edit, and I also learned to not use a dangling participle. One of my big things, and I had always kept writing short stories. They didn't seem to be published, but I had a whole slew of them. My husband was very ill with two types of arthritis, so we retired, and he came back to the desert. Uh, by the way, where I live in 29 Palms, I'm exactly 6 miles away from the gate into the Joshua Tree National Park, which is fantastic. It's a beautiful place. So, anyway, we go back to the desert, and I wasn't really ready to retire. So my husband said, "Well, why don't you go back to writing? I always liked your story." I went back to writing because I had still been writing over the years, and I started gathering all the chapters I had for the one called Gather the Children. I wound up with enough for two books and realized there was no way anyone was going to publish a brand new author with someone with over almost 200,000 words in a book. So I split it. And once again, I consulted my brother, who was the English major. He was, by that time, retired from being an English instructor. But he liked it this time and didn't laugh, said it was a good book. And only he pushed this one company that he had gone through and said they were honorable. And I knew better, but I went with it. It was a vanity. It took me 8 years to get my rights back to Gather the Children. In the meantime, I had published Before We Leave, which is the second book, uh, independently. I actually went through BookBub when they had just started, and they were much less expensive then. They were started by Writer's Digest, I believe, which is why I trusted them. And they were far less expensive. They edited, and they had a great cover, and they were no problem. When I later found a real publisher, they just signed the rights and everything over to me, no problem.
No.
Yeah, so I have no problem with that company. But the other ones, then Return of the Maca, book three, I published independently because by that time one could do so on Amazon. The next one uh, was Man Through Man, and I also published that independently. However, through all of this, Anna, McDonald's wife, would not shut up. So I had to go back and write Earthbound, telling how she and McDonald actually got together. The Indian raid that I once killed everybody that didn't kill everyone. And Earthbound actually became my most popular novel. And
Wow.
yeah, it's still selling well in Germany, of all places.
Wow.
I don't understand, but I am not objecting. So and of course, since I had her as an immigrant, I had to do her as a German immigrant because I knew how my family reacted. That was a little bit later in time. My great grandparents, my paternal grandmother's side, had arrived in the 1870s, and my other grandparents all arrived in the 1880s. But I knew the what they experienced. I knew how they held on to their culture. I knew, a lot about their history. So, and the history of the German immigrants. Not going into how I knew this, but yeah, I loved history, by the way. So I, of course, made Anna German. And
Well, I guess that's why it's very popular in Germany. You have a popular German character.
it could be because I use all the German, one of the ladies at the museum uh, who had immigrated from Germany in the 1920s when she was still a child, thanked me for writing Gather the Children. And I said, huh? She said, well, how did you know? And I said, know what? She said, how we talked around the dinner table. And I broke out laughing because my father's people never really quit speaking German. So there were a lot of German phrases in what Anna and one of the other characters say. It's really amazing. So, but it's the old German. Since World War II, they actually use have some of the same words have a different meaning.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I knew this. Well, I found that out from my brother who was the English major at Iowa.
So let me ask you, what are the benefits of writing an ongoing series versus a different subject for every book?
When they're telling you what's happening, you can see them, you can smell them, you know what they're doing, and and they won't shut up until I write it down.
So do you think that really helps in growing your readership and your fan base?
I'm not sure about that. I really don't. I have no clue, Ted. I don't lie about it. My marketing skills are zilch, really. So,
But you do have a publisher. I know you're with Next Chapter Publishing, because that's actually my publisher as well. So let's give a plug to them. How did that relationship come about, and how has that helped with your book sales?
it's helped tremendously. I won't lie about it. My royalties have increased quite a bit. In fact, next chapter was once called Creativia. I had already published Earthbound through a small press publisher, but when she said I was her best-selling author, I knew this was not going to last, and sure enough, she went down, unfortunately. So at that time, someone else that I knew as an author was already with Creativia and suggested I join them. So I sent in Earthbound to them and Gather the Children. No, I not Gather the Children. I still didn't have the right to. I sent in Earthbound and before we leave, and they took both of them. And then they took Return to the Maca and Man to Man, etc. Um, when I finally got the rights back to Gather the Children, they also published that. And of course, I just kept writing then about the family that the man who was called McDonald on Earth and is actually the Maca of Dawn on Thalia, the other planet, uh, his family and how it ruled on Thalia and his friendships there. And I seem to still be writing about Thalia.
So what's up next? Are you going to continue with all these book series?
I had thought that since I was past the age of 80, I would not be writing anymore. I started my memoirs. I haven't gotten any further than the age of about 40, I don't think. However, the book that I'm not writing is now at 29,390 words. So I don't know if it's ever going to be published, but it may be. And yes, it's another book about failure, how they went to war again.
That's great. We're having a little problem hearing you. Or maybe if
Maybe
you could, yeah, it's
maybe I've got too far away. How's that? Does that work better?
that is better. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. So what challenges would you say you've had to overcome in your career as far as getting your writing, finding time to write while you still have a job, and juggling that with your
Well,
personal
actually,
life?
I when I still had a job, I didn't do very well on getting published. Once I was retired and started talking with other authors, I was much better off. The internet is a fabulous tool for so many things. I simply haven't learned to use it as a great marketing tool. But since the publisher, does and must be doing some marketing somewhere, because, as I said, my royalties have totally improved.
That's
So
great. Or your fan base continues to grow.
what's amazing is that there have been people in all over the world that have bought my book. It makes no sense. Man True Man seems to be really popular in France. I have no explanation for that one either, because there's no French people or anything like that. The rest of the Tono series is not popular there, but Man True Man is. Uh, I don't understand.
Well, I think what it means is that you've written good stories that have struck a nerve, and word spreads. And then, if it's being sold on Amazon, the more reviews you get, and the
Right.
more hits you're getting, it just keeps expanding exponentially. But it starts with a good story. And really, that's, I guess, if I'm going to impart advice, you're the one being interviewed. But you know yes, everyone should keep writing. And certainly, I'd like your opinion on this too, as far as advice for new writers. But keep writing, but also try to find that story that's going to really find a good niche
Right.
amongst the readers.
Very true. And as far as the new writers, read. It sounds really silly, but you'll read something that strikes a nerve, and you'll find yourself somehow emulating it. Like one of my favorite early American books about the early Americas is Conrad Richter's The Awakening Land, his trilogy of this family that goes from the east into Ohio when Ohio was a far different land than it is right now. And particularly southern Ohio at the time uh, had far more forests. Southern Ohio still had forests when my husband was a young man. His grandfather was near them. So, but yeah, it's a strange culture down there. Let me put it that way. Uh, that's, I'm not knocking them. It's just different. But I love Conrad Richter's book because it was a generational thing of they moved in and then their children became parents and grandparents, and the trials that they went through as the environment around them changes. The same thing with Frank Herbert's Dune. That too struck a nerve with the generation of going all through the system. Yet the one boy, because of the change, seems to live on forever, and because of the renewing tubs, so does one of the other main characters. It's it's quite interesting to me. But those
Hmm.
sort of struck a nerve that I think I sort of emulated them with the generational columns of people marching on and on. And the other one, like I mentioned earlier, was Zena Henderson's Success with the People. It proved that females could write the science fiction. Uh, a lot of females at the time were coming in, but they, uh, to me, wrote more fantasy with the dragons and everybody remembers the dragons of Frel, but and to me that's fantasy. That isn't as much science fiction as when you have to do the research to find out what the heck your character's talking about on these explosive and dark holes and so forth. And yes, I
Yeah.
did a lot of research.
Yeah. Well, that's good advice. Research and read. So unfortunately, our time is coming short already. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties.
Oh
So
well.
the next time we have you back, we'll get that all sorted out. But
Okay.
I want to thank you, Mary, for your time.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Trust
Thank you.
me.
Thank you. And like I said, we're going to put links to all your books below the video. I encourage everybody that watches these podcasts to subscribe to our Patreon account. And thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you.
Bye, Mary.